With that, I'd like to introduce tonight's moderator, friend of GCM and adjunct professor at Columbia College, DeRondal Bevly.
Max and I are different in height, so just give me a moment to make sure that this works. No, not rubbing in, just calling out some facts. Good evening, everyone. My name is DeRondal Bevly. As Max mentioned, I have the great pleasure and privilege of moderating tonight's forum. I am a proud Forest Park resident, but even more so, I am a proud member of the GCM Steering Committee. And so we thank you all for being here today for this important conversation. I just want to acknowledge that we are being streamed right now on YouTube, and a recording of this will be available tomorrow. And a few housekeeping items in terms of election coverage. The election guide, the electronic version, will be available on Monday, and the print version should be available no later than Wednesday. And so, as we kick off here, we have 3 of the 5 candidates available. I'm not sure if Ms. Perez is still joining us, but we'll get started anyway. First question, fine folks. In lieu of an opening statement, the first question is going to be, why are you running for the board for D97? And Venus Hurd Johnson, we'll start with you.
I probably should ask this question before now. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming out. Appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to be here. To answer the question of why I'm running, I am an incumbent candidate, so this will be my second term. The reason that I would that I'm running for a second term is there's still work to be done. When Nancy and I ran the first time, we ran in COVID. So that took up a ton of normal board responsibilities. Then we hired our superintendent, also taking up lots of time with regard to how a board normally functions and some of the things that you can focus on. So I would say for the last year and a half, maybe a little bit longer, we have been able to really focus on those key important things that help our schools to run efficiently and the responsibilities of our board. So there's still lots of work to be done. Our superintendent is got some really great ideas, but to make those ideas come to fruition, she needs the support of a board that is seasoned and that believes in the vision and wants to move our community forward. I started off as a parent leader. My kids matriculated through Oak Park schools, Man, Julian, and then the high school. I have one son who is a junior in high school and the other is an Oak Park graduate. And I really did gain an understanding of the beauty of our school district and what we can do for our kids and some of the things that we need to work on. But I think it's really important to have an open dialogue, be collaborative and communicative about what our vision is and how we plan to get there, how we plan to support our teachers, how we plan to support our students, and how we can engage our community. And those were some of the reasons why I'd like to run.
Thank you. Next up, Vincent Gay.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for coming. My name is Vincent Gay. My family moved here in 2015 for the same reasons as a lot of people. We were living in the South Loop. We brought our second kid home, and we knew that our oldest was getting ready for kindergarten. And so I told my wife, it's time for us to move to Oak Park because it's only getting more expensive. It's time for us just to jump in now. And we've had an amazing experience. We've got 2 kids. We've got a 4th grader at Whittier. We've got an 8th grader at Brooks. My professional background is that I've been an educator my entire life. I've gone from, I taught AP US History right out of college in Montclair, New Jersey. Then I've had roles as assistant principal, founding principal, as well as a role as a turnaround principal. So to me, I think I bring a wealth of experience of 20 years as an educator. And it's really important for me to be able to find spaces that I can serve. There's lots of things that people can do in Oak Park to give back, and I wish I was qualified to do other things, but I think that being on the Board of Education, given my background, is one of the things I feel like I can immediately provide some value. I think the board so far has done a really great job of stewarding our district, and I think I want to essentially step up and take on some of that responsibility and can continue to move us forward.
Thank you. And Nancy Ross-Driven.
Hi there. I have lived in Oak Park for 12 years with my spouse and our 2 children, who are now 8th graders at Julian. And when I decided to rerun, I am currently serving on the board, I had many friends say, "You're done though. Like, why are you rerunning now? Your kids are like in 8th grade, you're done. You've already done all the volunteering and all that." And my response to that is a really easy one, and it's, I'm not running, I'm not doing this for my kids. I mean, I love my kids, I would do anything for them, but if you are up here running because of your kids, you have the wrong mindset. And thankfully, I don't think that's the mindset of anyone up here. I am up here because of all of the kids of our community. I moved to Oak Park to be part of a community, and I take that very seriously. I will say my background in working with usability, where I go in and talk to different groups and try to get them to come to consensus on how to share resources and how to utilize the resources of their institution to reach their audiences, has been the most useful thing on the board, because as Venus said earlier, collaboration is one of the biggest pieces, and it is part of why I'm running again. 4 years on the board, 12 years in the community, I've had a chance to really get to know people and start making connections and start bringing people into the room. I've been very proud to see the district do things like working with the literacy piece, making sure that teachers are part of the conversation, that parents are being asked for their opinions, that students are being asked for part of their opinion. And that's the kind of change I think we need if we're actually going to move the needle. As Venus noted, we came in on the heels of COVID and on the hiring of a new superintendent. So that work is just starting to come to fruition. And I feel like I would be remiss to step off now when we are just on the cusp of doing such amazing things for our students. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Becky Perez, question for you. Why are you running for the D97 board?
Okay, so thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Sorry for the delay, parenting duty calls. But I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to tell you about my story and what brings me to the table as a candidate for D97. I am a former employee of D97. I was there for 6 years at Lincoln Elementary and Irving Elementary. I'm also a parent of 2 Irving Eagles, 2nd grade and 4th grade, that are joining us tonight. I am a practicing school psychologist currently in the high school district, so I have kind of that K-12 experience. I have the elementary, got a chance to work in the middle schools as a bilingual school psychologist, and then currently doing evaluation as a school psychologist, but also as a person that is doing direct service counseling and mental health services. I think what brings me to the table is post-election woes and worries about our nation and about our public schools. I am very much for public schools. I am obviously thankful for the time that I had available to work with the public schools here in D97. I think there's a lot of potential. The board has been doing a great job. I'd love to contribute to that mission and provide my own civic duty and public service.
All right, thank you much. And just another housekeeping note: 5th candidate Ashley Lenz could not be with us tonight due to a family matter. So tonight I have a series of questions in front of me. Some questions have been submitted by readers of Wednesday Journal in advance. Others have been created by us at GCM, as well as those of you in the audience tonight. If you have questions as the conversation opens up, we have Jill here in the back in black here with note cards, so please write those questions down and send them up, and I will try to do my best to get to as many as I can. First question, Becky, we will start with you. What are your top 3 priorities and why?
Great question. I think there's a lot of good work coming out of this board. I do think that looking at and reflecting on the things that have been on the minds of our constituents and our community members, talking to teachers, and obviously being a former D97 employee, I know we were all really wanting to see and come to fruition the goal that has always been a part of our mission, which is equity and opportunity gaps. Looking at literacy and how students are growing, we want, now that I'm in the high school setting, obviously I'm getting to see a lot of the kids that I've worked with before. And of course they've grown, many of them are heading off to college. There's a lot of wonderful highlights, but we also still have students coming to us that are not closing those gaps. And so our goal obviously is to think about what it looks like to be an Oak Parker student. I know they've been working a lot on the middle schools and that transition. I would love to contribute to that dialogue. So that's definitely the literacy and closing the gap associated with that. I think another big conversation piece has been along the lines of thinking about discipline, behavior, so relooking and reconsidering how restorative practices operate in a school environment, how we can teach kids to be mentally well, access resources both at school and in the community, and then obviously thinking about how teachers and administrators are handling behaviors when they do sometimes become like repeat errors or behavioral errors. So looking at that piece. And then lastly is this idea that across the board is this idea of relationships and marginalized community members. So oftentimes we're talking about, you know, the equity gap or the opportunity gap or the achievement gap, but how are we bringing them into the conversation? I think there's a lot of new good ideas that the board has come up with, trying to relay information that, you know, is important to all of us. But even as I look across the room, I want to see more community members coming and learning and listening to us in a variety of ways. So I would love to not just talk about other community members, but really bring them into the conversation.
All right, thank you. Venus, same question.
3 priorities, right? Just that fast, I forgot. Okay. Are answers timed, by the way? Yes and no? Okay.
You got some wiggle room.
Okay, got it. So the 3 priorities for me are, first, we really need to strengthen our middle schools. We need to strengthen the 6th graders coming in and what their experience is like, and making sure that they're well prepared for middle school, as well as our 8th graders who are graduating and are moving on to OPRF. Our middle schools have always been a challenge, even before I moved to Oak Park, and I have lived here 20 years. I remember a physician that I was calling on took her kids out of the middle school because 20 years ago, she said her exact words were, the middle schools have a problem. I don't think the middle schools have a problem. I do think we have some challenges that we need to address. One of them has, loud and clear, was safety. And I know that we have worked really hard to address safety concerns at the middle school. We're not completely there yet, but if we were not, the teachers would be letting us know, as they have in the past. And we have not had public comment about middle school safety the same way that we did once before. So we're working on that. Some of that has to do with restorative practices, behavior, expectations, a sense of welcoming, and making sure that our kids are well prepared and that there aren't those distractions. I think middle school is hard, really hard, and I wouldn't do it again if you paid me. Well, maybe, but how do we prepare our kids to enter middle school, and how do we prepare them to leave middle school? So that's the first priority. Second priority is curriculum. We have been operating without a standardized curriculum for both math and reading. Our teachers are awesome, so they have, in groups, sometimes in schools, sometimes across grades, have worked to make sure that they're meeting the standards and are borrowing information and curriculum from one another. But in terms of a standardized curriculum, we don't have that. We are currently piloting both with lots of teacher leaders and lots of teacher support. So I want to make sure that we get that curriculum up and running for our students. Here's the rub with doing that. When you pilot, you have to pilot the curriculum. Those kids that are piloting the curriculum aren't the kids who will be affected by the curriculum. And I come from a business standpoint. I still can't figure out how to fix that, how to make it happen faster. I think that's one of the frustrating things for me about serving on the board is I'd like for things to move faster than they actually do. And that's always something I'm thinking about. I honestly have not figured that out yet. Third is just communication. We are still operating in silos. The admin is in a silo, the building leadership and teachers are in a silo, parents are in a silo, and the community is in a silo. We do work together, but we can work together better. And we can communicate, we can understand one another's perspectives and concerns and work collaboratively to address those and make sure that we all understand where we're coming from and where we want to go as a community.
Thank you. Vincent? Top 3 priorities.
I'll be really efficient and give you 5.
Again, you have some wiggle room.
Perfect, I'll try. I think the achievement gap is something that we can't get tired of talking about. It's great that D97 is piloting some literacy curriculum, and the literacy curriculum, which is based in the science of reading, has been shown to help marginalized students more. So I think this new curriculum is going to help. However, we're going to need to make sure that the next budget is actually aligning the correct training and resources for teachers. Because if we buy curriculum and we don't support teachers with lots of training and development, we just wasted that money and kids are going to fall further behind. Similar to, we got my father an iPhone and it was a waste of money. He just does nothing that the iPhone can do. So how do we maximize the growth there? I think similar to what Becky and Venus said, how do we also make the transitions within D97 more seamless? I think the biggest one for me is by having a kid in 8th grade, the transition from 5th to 6th grade is tough because kids and families, you go from having one teacher relationship to now you have 7 teacher relationships. And on the teacher end, it's hard to communicate with parents in the same way we do in elementary school. So how are we better preparing our kids and families to become 6th graders? Then the same way, what are we doing the thing that everyone's going to say, because I think it's true, is how do we also just rethink the middle school? I would argue that we were terrified of our kid going to middle school. There was a little bit of we went in 1 foot in, but we've had an amazing experience at Brooks. I think one of the hallmarks is like, how do we get the good stories of things that are happening in middle schools out? Because right now, there is no counter narrative. One of the ways we can also address the middle school slide is that if you look at the activities that kids have at OPRF, there's like 1.5 million clubs because you have so many people. The middle schools just don't. And so if you think about, at least my experience is that like we were at Lincoln and we were also at Whittier. Everyone loves their elementary school. And then you see everyone with OPRF gear. How do we rethink how we're branding the middle school? Even though the kids are only there 3 years, how are we making sure it's a sense of pride versus like it's elementary school, middle school, then I'm really excited to go to PRF. The 4th priority that I don't think we're talking about enough that's going to come very quickly is that we are seeing a rise in students with IEPs throughout the district, roughly about 31% more students with IEPs since 2021. So when we talk about our district, we have to realize the district is different from a learner perspective now than it was in 2021. Where we need to make sure we're focusing and being very aggressive is like, how are we recruiting and retaining special education teachers? Because when you move from, like, we're roughly about 13% IEPs to now we're at 17%, we need to make sure that every kid that needs services is getting those services, and we're not delaying kids being eligible because we don't have enough staff for it. So how are we making sure we're solving that problem? And it means that we're going to scour the entire country, finding the best and brightest special education teachers, because that's what our kids deserve. And my fifth thing, 20 seconds, I can do it. My fifth thing is, there's a mental health epidemic with kids. How are we supporting kids? I think we can do a good job of supporting kids from 8 to 3 when they're with us, but what supports and collaborations are we doing when kids are home and they need mental health support? I think there's a lot of kids who need some tangible supports, and like, how are we really providing wraparound services so that all of our kids are protected, no matter what hour it is?
Thank you. Nancy, same question.
All right, so the fun of going last is yes, those were all good answers. I'm going to hit on several of those as well with some other thoughts on them. So the first one I'm actually going to start with, I'm going to wrap it around and say, I would also say mental health. We came out of a national pandemic not too long ago, and I think we all kind of remember that. And our students were at home, and our students were not only for school, but in terms of relations with relatives, with friends. That was a big mental load for students. And then we came back. And I don't know that we have fully addressed that in our students. And I think, to Vince's point, part of it is addressing it in schools. Whenever anything goes wrong with children, people look at schools and say, ooh, children are hungry. Okay, well, let's give them school lunch. That's great. Students have mental health issues. Well, let's solve them all in schools. And I will say, our social emotional staff are amazing. Our social workers, even our frontline teachers, are so amazing at supporting our students, but we can't do this alone. We live in a village, and our village has resources across other entities. The township, for example. So one of the things that I feel like we need to strengthen is looking at how we are connecting our students and their families to the resources that they need in regards to mental health. Which brings me to my second point, which is student belonging. One of the key components of the safety issue, I think, that Venus brought up is when you feel like you belong, when you feel like there is someone you can go to, when you feel like you have peers, you have a place to go when those feelings are getting too big in the moment. You have a sense of connection. You have a sense of belonging in the place that you're in. And again, coming out of the pandemic, back into the schools, we have a whole generation of kids who kind of missed out on some of the ability to learn those and to make some of those connections. And I will say one of the pieces that when we came on board, Venus and I both asked for was, we are taking, I believe Vince mentioned this as well, we're taking students out of 5th grade and just, here you go, here's 6th grade, have fun with that. And we said that's not good enough. You're going from a small classroom into a big school, and there's no transition. And with that, we had parents and teachers and the administration come together. And again, I'm going to emphasize that part because part of the critical piece of this is all the adults in the room working together to come up with the summer week introduction for our 5th grade students into 6th grade. And by all accounts, that has been extremely well received and has made a tremendous difference. One of the goals of that program is that every child walks away with at least 2 adults they feel comfortable going up to and speaking with. Another goal is to make sure that each student has at least 2 or 3 students that they feel comfortable hanging around with. So these are the types of things that make a difference in making a sense of community for our students in the schools. The last piece, but by no means the least, is addressing the opportunity gap. As Venus mentioned, we came into this transitioning pandemic, transitioning superintendent, and we have now started the process of all 3 legs of that stool. The administration, the teachers, the parents, all the adults sitting on top of the community working together to look at what do we need to change to address that gap. Because we can look at it, we all look at it and say, wow, that's not great. We are kind of embarrassed by that. What can we change to it? Well, do we really need to change anything? To keep doing the same things and expect a change is not going to happen. We've instituted focal cohorts where we're actually looking at our students who have the most need. And that is variable. It can change by school and by year. Who needs the most help? If we're looking at who needs the most help and how we can help them, that helps all of our students. All of the resources and all the components we come up with work on that. The literacy component I mentioned earlier, we're working with teachers. To Vince's point, one of the pieces is once you've selected one, and I do think one of the areas where we went awry before was not testing in our schools. I think if we had tested in our schools with our students and our teachers, we would have had different outcomes with our previous selections of literacy components. This time we are testing, we're working with teachers, we're working with students, and it takes time, but that's the time you need to come up with something that's actually going to work for our students to make that difference we need it to make. And at the end of it, we will have a whole cohort of mentor teachers to help with the implementation. The district already has plans on how to work with each of those teachers to spread them out through schools. You have teachers who have already worked with the materials. So we are making headway, and one of the reasons why I'm running is we are starting to make this headway, and I really want to make sure we push it through because that opportunity gap really needs to be addressed, and we really need to make sure that every student who leaves our district is recognized for the bright student who can excel and is ready to go on to high school and just thrive. Thank you.
Thank you. Audience question. This is for any and all. Why do we feel no child should be left behind? So even if they cannot read or do math, they are moved to the next grade. They learn that they learn that they do not have to do the work. I volunteer in a before-school reading program. A child is in 3rd grade, but it is at kindergarten level, and that is with the extra help. All of you mentioned curriculum, mentioned opportunity, achievement gap. Response to that? Audience question? This is for any and all. Actually, Nancy, we'll start with you because you were allowed to start with you.
Hi, so No Child Left Behind was left behind for a reason. It was a bad idea. I will say in terms of the specific example mentioned with a kindergartner in 3rd grade getting reading supports, there is a social emotional context to this, and a student may be ready in other areas, but need extra supports in a literacy component. And it is on us to not just say, oh, well, that's okay, we'll give you a little extra work, we'll do this. I will say it is on us to say, why is that? Was that student one of our students? How did they get here? Because that's not okay. It is not okay that a kindergartner has made it to 3rd grade and cannot read. Or is reading, at a kindergarten level. That's not okay. Did this student come to us and already behind? Okay, what interventions do we need to do to help them reach up to their peers? Does it mean we need to take them aside for some of this time? Do they need an IEP? Is this a bigger issue? To Vincent's point earlier, we went from 14% of our students having IEPs in 2021 to we now have 17.1% in 2024. That said, IEPs are all different. You know, we have students who are autistic, we have students who have hearing issues, all of them need different supports. And I will say in terms of reading, is there an issue that needs to be addressed with this student? So looking at No Child Left Behind, that was just promote people up. That is not okay. What we do need to do is look at our individual students and say, where are they? And what do they need to be on deck with their peers? It doesn't mean you just keep promoting them. So, hey, it's 3rd grade, you're reading at kindergarten. Well, wherever you are, we'll just, it'll be good enough. We'll move you on into 4th grade. It means by the time they get to 4th grade, we should be working to get them up to 4th grade. Our reading specialists, interventions. One of the pieces that I'm very excited about in the district is that we are starting to look at outside of school time. We have a volunteer who was mentioned in this, and that's great, but we're also looking at how do we get our teachers into that extra time, because sometimes we can't do this within the school day. Sometimes students need more support than that. So I appreciate that the district is really starting to look at, there's a lot of studies actually out of Irvine in California on how impactful out of school and after school programming can be in closing the opportunity gap and in closing reading gaps and in closing math gaps. So I am very excited to see that work starting in the district.
About Venus and then Vincent.
I don't like to hear that there is a third grade student that's reading on a kindergarten reading level, but it's realistic. It's going to happen. What we have in place in D97 is an MTSS program, which is multi-tier student supports. So that's identified, and there are supports in the school from the teacher to the reading interventionist to the social worker, even the speech pathologist, that will help those providing the right level of support, and it's tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. And so maybe this student needs tier 3 level supports. I don't want to speak about the details because a volunteer isn't going to know those details, and I won't know those details either, especially at the board level. But I do know that the MTSS multi-level student support works. I have seen how multiple adults in the building intervene and help those students get where they need to be. In fact, a third grader isn't reading, if he's reading at a kindergarten level, he's getting third grade interest materials, but at a kindergarten reading level. So it keeps the child interested in reading, and they don't feel like, the idea is that they don't feel like they're reading baby books, basically. So there's lots of resources that are child-centered and appropriate to help make those jumps. We don't know how the child came to us, and making those academic jumps is really, really difficult, and you have to have everybody on board, and that means the parents as well. But we aren't just passing those kids on. We are absolutely identifying them and pouring the appropriate level of resources into those students so that they can be the best student that they can be. And we get them to their best, whatever that means for that student. And celebrate that, most importantly. We need kids to know that their hard work is recognized, and they should be proud of themselves all along their educational career in D97.
Thank you. Vince, Becky?
No, it's a sad story to hear, but I think and I don't want to be the person who says this, but as an educator, this is the reality for some kids. It's the reality. It's more widespread in districts than you would actually imagine for kids. So we'd hope that there's a kid who's 3 grade levels behind in reading, that we are doing full wraparound services. So the fact that a volunteer is helping support a student, that is the reality. That is actually a good thing. It kind of goes back to my earlier point. That's why we need to make sure that we are obsessing over student learning gaps, and then we are fully staffed in our special education department. Because if we don't, insert kid won't be supported. The other part, which is jarring, is that there is also research that it is damaging for kids to repeat 2 years in a row. So I don't know the situation, I'm just giving you broad strokes. So sometimes, the work I do now is we do high dosage tutoring and do a lot of work in Louisiana. There's also the social component of, I identify as a third grader. It is mentally damaging for me to be in a kindergarten classroom or even in a first grade classroom. So oftentimes what schools are doing is, kid may be retained for 1 year, but then you're trying to do MTSS, making sure the kid has a support plan. Because what I've seen personally is that reading is, forgive me if you garden, reading is sometimes like gardening, where you're trying a bunch of stuff, and there are kids who can jump 2 grade levels. If they're behind, they can jump 2 grade levels in a single year. Put them with a great teacher, a great curriculum, as well as books they're interested in. that's when you see kids take off. So sometimes it's just a matter of like, it's disheartening that the kid's a couple years behind, but hopefully there's a group of team that's wrapped their arms around us trying all the things possible to make sure that kid reads. Because the staggering stat that I'll share in my time is like, the research we've done at work is that kids who are not reading at grade level by the end of 3rd grade are 4 times less likely to graduate from high school. And so like that trend goes on because once you leave 3rd grade, your standard curriculum across the country assumes that every 4th grader can read. So now that gap that kids didn't get by 3rd grade becomes bigger because it's an even bigger burden on the teacher who is now trying to teach content versus someone who actually can't access the material. So that's why we need to make sure that like we are identifying kids who need support in kinder or in 1st grade, and we are doing all we can because 3rd grade is a big moment in kids' lives to make sure they're on track in being proficient readers.
Thank you.
Long, could you repeat the question? Because I know what I'm saying, but I want to make sure for the context that we're still all on the same page.
In terms of, there was a question about volunteer 3rd grader, they're at a kindergarten level. Why should no child be left behind if ultimately they're not able to do the work once they're moved on to higher grades?
And I wanted to comment first on the No Child Left Behind piece, just because to give context, and I can honestly say, I was in the throes of graduate school trying to pursue a doctorate in school psychology in the midst of this coming into play across the states, and it really looked very different depending on what state you were in. At the time, I was at Indiana University Bloomington, and I was working for the Equity Project, and the Equity Project studied disproportionality in discipline, disproportionality of racial and ethnic minority students and language minority students in special education. So it was like everyday conversations about why is it that we do have kids that are 2 or 3 grade levels behind in terms of reading and math skills or writing skills, writing, which is often the forgotten one. But that being said, that's really was the beginning of this idea of school choice. So if we identified, these low-performing schools, their funds would be pulled, and then they were penalized, and they would become takeover schools. And those takeover schools then were occupied by America Teach programs or, some kind of other organization that was funded federally, or people started moving to private schools. And so I started with my why. I am a public school advocate. I believe our public schools should be federally and state funded. I believe that we should work on improving those settings. So I definitely think that policy, in essence, was to pull resources. As a result, there were, people that lost their jobs, the morale of teachers evolved. But all that to be said, going back to the environment in which, reading, writing, and math develops, that one child has access to tutoring. I can attest to children that I've seen make it all the way to high school still reading at the 3rd or 4th grade level. And you have to put it into context. Based on what my lovely co-candidates have stated, it's all about context, right? This child may already be identified with an IEP, and they do actually offer, what we've encouraged schools to do is to offer all resources, like this idea of layering supports through a multi-tiered system of support, so a child can get tutoring for reading on top of having an IEP, and they do sometimes have 2 to 3 grade levels below what's expected, because that's how severe you have to be in order to really receive special education. I think that also is telling. 17% of the population in D97 having an IEP is greater than what we would anticipate when a system, a curriculum of reading, writing, or math is working well. Typically, we would want to anticipate that would be 5 to 10% of the population. That's usually the numbers. So yes, we have more children than we would expect to have IEPs. Why is that the case? Is it that they're behind because of our literacy curriculum, our math curriculum, or because, of the context or the pandemic? It's all of those things combined. However, I also think I am struggling as a school psychologist because I'm the one that sits there behind the scenes testing students and then, making eligibility decisions. I actually have a great divide in our community. Ones in which, if I talk to marginalized community members that still believe that special education tracks their kids and isolates them, that don't want IEP services. And then I have other community members coming to us with thick neuropsych reports that tell us my child is disabled. I can attest that sometimes we got to explore those avenues because we need more information. But at the end of the day, as a school psychologist, my goal is to help bridge that communication gap about what services could look like for children. And as a board member, my goal would be to continue to help, think about the trends in terms of how kids are receiving services. I'm hopeful about this new curriculum that is being piloted in the schools. I believe that it's all going to be about looking at how we're training professionals, and just from the standpoint of being in schools when new things were being implemented. I was hired when Lucy Calkins was rolling out. I still remember many of our teachers trying to hold on to some of the curriculum and saying, we love these phonics, based books. Please don't take them away from us. And then moving towards this new curriculum, we have 3 different kinds. My hope is that we listen to teachers about the things they already have available and what they can integrate that's evidence-based in the curriculums. But let's listen to teachers, because I've worked with so many people that are like, I've been teaching reading for 21 years, I knew this. And when you took away phonics, I felt very disheartened by what we were doing. Now, mind you, again, we were believing in the science we thought we had. So things happen, but I'm hopeful. I want to get the training to the teachers.
So, Becky, I want to stay with you for a follow-up question from the audience that ties into what your remarks there. Will the district include keep phonics in the curriculum so children can understand how to break down words so they can read and understand the word? Whole language did not work. Teachers should not have to do phonics on their own.
I think that is the purpose. So I think committees, the conversations that at least I've been privy to, listening to board meetings, the goal is, and in researching the curriculums, I think at this point they're piloting something called Amplify. A lot of the things are predetermined. Some of the programs that they've selected have more of a grammar base, focus more on reflection. I've heard a lot of positive things about the most recent one. I have also heard some feedback about culturally responsive materials, so that's going to be the key. This is where teacher expertise is going to work, where our curriculum and instruction employees are going to work hard to identify, okay, we got a research-based curriculum, we've got all the tools and the materials. How do we make sure we're still reaching and providing culturally relevant materials? Meaning, I want, Mateo and Mia that are sitting in the back being able to see kids that look like themselves, that maybe speak more than one language in the books that they're reading, right? So my hope is that, yes, that was the purpose, to fully integrate evidence-based practices that go back to this balanced language approach where you have phonics, and that's heavily, integrated in K2, but we don't drop it off in 3, 4, 5. We keep working on it in pieces, right? And we're working on, my 4th grader is working on prefixes and suffixes. So yes, that is a part of it. The goal is to move towards that. And I'll pass it on to my colleagues, as I know that, or at least now I feel like we're colleagues, know more about it as they've been making those decisions.
Nancy?
Yeah, so I just want to acknowledge that yes, phonics has already been noted as being missing. We have already supplemented. It is not well loved what we're using to supplement right now, but we have added resources immediately to add in phonics to the program as it exists now. One of the key components that is being looked for in the new materials is something that would actually work with the science of literacy, that basically is looking at current pieces and making sure that there is a phonics component. I also want to address that one of the lenses that they are looking at the curriculum through, that the reason they picked these 3 and as they're going through is looking at the equity component and making sure that students should be able to see themselves in this curriculum. They should be able to relate to it. And that was one of the really important components when we were looking at which ones to select for a review.
Thank you. Venus or Vincent?
I'll try, oh, sorry. We're doing like a singing duo.
If either of you wanted to add some additional response to that.
I'm a fan of Amplify. From a curriculum standpoint, if you were to look, the NAEP scores that came out, just in terms of like how we're doing as a country in terms of reading, Louisiana is actually the only state that didn't see reading deficits. They're the only state in the country where they actually saw positive growth with their kids. And if you think about Louisiana, that is a state from southern Louisiana to northern Louisiana. It could be 5 different countries, just how diverse it is. And so I'm excited that we're actually piloting Amplify. It's based in the science of reading. It's getting really good results there. Maybe it worked for us. I'm really interested to see like what we're seeing from our individual pilots, but that was a positive sign. You looked at the scores, like they were definitely doing amazing work compared to where everyone else was. You saw a little bit of deficits.
I just want to talk about a little bit about the process for piloting these curriculums, just because as a community, you need to know that this was well thought out, and multiple people were involved in the process of executing this. So there are teacher leaders at each school, and in each grade, if I'm not, a few grades at each school, if it's spread out. But we're talking about somewhere between 15 and 20 teachers that are piloting this at various schools in various grades. They're coming together regularly. They're talking about what's working, what's not working. They're also talking and working with the administrators. They're identifying gaps in the materials that they have. They're looking at equity. They're looking at cultural relevancy. They're looking at whether or not implementation of this with their grades is working the way that it was designed to work. And they're coming together and they're working through it and talking and sharing ideas and also sharing that with the administrators. So the concept of collaboration on how both the math and the reading curriculum are being implemented in this pilot is outstanding. It shows the leadership of our teachers. It shows their expertise. They are the classroom experts, and they know how to teach. They know how to teach kids. They know how to teach kids how to read. So we are leaning very heavily on them, and they're excited about it. They are really appreciating that they stepped up and that their voices are being heard, and we are listening to them in order to provide the best for our students. So we're all really excited about this pilot. And then once we roll out the pilot, those teacher leaders are going to be teacher champions at each of their schools to help make sure that that transition for all of the school to, once that curriculum is adopted, is done as efficiently and smoothly as possible.
Okay, thank you. A lot of questions, and you've each mentioned it in your own way about the issue of mental health for our students. And we're still figuring out the residual impacts of COVID and the implications on socialization and behavior. What type of comprehensive solutions could you offer or would like to see to address that mental health issues for our students? I can start with you.
And comment just for the last several years, it does feel like things are getting more challenging. Kids are experiencing more anxiety, feeling some more sense of depression, or we're having externalizers, right? Kids that are presenting with either having experienced trauma or having excessive amounts of chronic stress that leads to behavioral challenges in the school environment. So I can attest to seeing it and seeing sometimes even the kids that were struggling in elementary school still struggling, in the high school setting. So I do believe that one of the reasons I started out in a K-5 setting was I actually started my career in a high school and then went back to the elementary setting. So I've had quite a few years of seeing how kids develop, and when we catch them young and we start to give them resources and we, build community with the parents, especially with the guardians, because there are, a variety of different family setups. When we connect with them and we empower them to seek resources and to also break down the barriers and stigma associated with seeking support, I think that's really been probably when we've experienced success. So that is oftentimes why I say I want to bring, school into the community and vice versa, and really try to bridge that gap and knowledge gap about why is it that we rely on therapy. In some cultures, even in my own, again, Mexican American, first generation, parents from Mexico City to this day are like, therapy? What is that? And their daughter is a school psychologist all the way through a doctorate, right? So I bring knowledge all the time to the table, but yet we still have this idea that if you seek support, you are weak, you are feeble. And that, again, doesn't speak to every community that we have here in Oak Park, but I can tell you that those are conversations we're still having. I also think that we're taxing quite a bit our social workers, psychologists in the district, to the point of saying, we want you to help these kids that are really struggling with behaviors, but we're also really struggling to hold kids also on a continuum of consequences and acknowledging behaviors that are challenging. Because when we leave the school setting, we are no longer going to be in a place in which certain behaviors are allowable. So we have to find the balance. So I think when we implemented restorative practices, it increased our relationships with kids and created more a sense of belonging and welcoming, which is really the foundation. And I spent at least 3 years traveling the state of Indiana, doing training teachers and administrators, from rural districts to metropolitan districts, teaching them about what was culturally responsive discipline practices. So before we called it restorative practices, we were calling it positive behavior intervention supports. So exactly. So PBIS, yeah. So I, coming into full circle back into schools, I saw that our teachers wanted to build those relationships with kids and families, but there's real human capacity limits sometimes when you're also expected to teach to read, to write, to do math, and then also be a surrogate parent for children. So I want to balance creating opportunities to build bridges with families and break down the barriers to mental health services in the community, build up the capacity for our teachers to feel empowered that they can do tough things, and that they are, doing really hard work every single day. So it's a balance of those two things, and also holding kids accountable and not being afraid to consequence. There's nothing wrong with that. It's actually okay and part of the restorative practices. Just a thought.
Thank you.
Could you repeat the question again? Sorry.
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Mental health issues for our students as a result of COVID and just where the world is now. What type of solutions would you offer to help the mental health of our students?
Perfect, thank you. It's interesting. So this is our 4th forum, and this is probably the first time I've disagreed with Becky the entire time. We've been, for the most part, agreed. I think that, to me, my experience, my opinion, I think this generation of kids is different than any other, where, from my experience, this generation of kids are more open to therapy, who more openly just talk about it. And number of times with kids, and they'll reference their therapist as a member of their support team. And I was like, oh, my therapist is this. And even my peers, my adult friends, I think we've come a long way in the last 20 years in how we socialize the need and the value of therapy. And so I think we can capitalize on that. So much of it is how do we have a wraparound roadmap for kids and families to know who do they go to for what? I think that we have amazing social workers, but I think that job is a little bit more triage. It's hard, especially if we see the increase in kids with IEPs who have social work minutes. That job's gonna be too taxing for one individual. So how do we essentially have one document where it says, hey, if you need support, here's where you go. And some of it's going to be how are we outsourcing, but also creating partnerships. I'd say creating the software solution is a company called Gaggle, which they monitor student online activity, looking for threats of harm. So then the administrators are getting alerted, hey, you know, we did analysis on what this kid's been looking at. You may want to check on that. So that's our tech solution. I think that there are on-demand crisis support lines from the Trevor Project to a nonprofit called OpenSeat, as well as, I'm forgetting the teen line that you see some people in the village have their signs up. I think it's also about how are we educating parents but also supporting parents. The number of parents who they are trying to support their child through a mental health episode, but they don't know that this is happening in multiple families and multiple homes. So how are we essentially destigmatizing it in the school being a beacon to kind of bring people together? So I don't think we're going to solve the mental health crisis with like, let's hire 5 more social workers, because the kids are only in school for a limited amount of time, and they're like, if you've been to school, like once the day starts, they're running from class to class, as well as like, this is not possible for staff members to always know. But I think that our litmus test should be, in a year, if we can implement this, a kid says, I was having a really tough time on a Saturday at 3 p.m. and I did this. And we know that they did this because like we provided those supports and resources so that no one should be left alone on a weekend feeling like the district isn't there, because it's not going to be possible, but there should be a roadmap for like students and families to know where they can get quick, immediate mental health support regardless of the time, regardless of the day. And I think if we can do that, that's going to allow us to be the leader in terms of mental health support for students across the country.
Thank you. Venus?
Mental health is definitely a challenge for our students. What I would say is every adult in the building is a first responder. They may not have the expertise to manage a child through what they may be feeling. I think it's also important for our kids to know that they're heard and seen, and that whatever big feelings they're having, there is someone in the building, I like to call them a soft landing. There's an adult in that building that is their soft landing. That's the person that they can go to, that they trust. Nancy mentioned our middle school, and each student was tasked with getting to know 2 adults. That's the culture of creating a soft landing. I've been in the schools where a student was doing a check-in with the administrative assistant for the building, because that's the person that they have a connection with. If that child then has a bigger issue or something happens, then that administrative assistant knows to contact the social worker, to contact the teacher, to talk to other adults in the building. So it's not always taxing the teacher or the social workers, but it's taking a whole building approach to managing our students. I think that's really, really important. I think it increases their sense of belonging. I think it increases their ability to feel like they're being seen. And then we are a well-resourced school district, community, I should say, not just in the schools, but also we have an Oak Park Mental Health Board. We have the townships, which has youth services. We have Thrive. There are places and opportunities for our families as well as our students to get the supports that they need. But we also need to make sure that we're equipping our parents in those really concrete but simple ways to help them manage their kids. We've talked about this as parents. If you've ever sat in an IEP meeting, there's at least 3 people that are going to use words that you don't know. And I'm college educated. So I'm comfortable saying, I don't know what that means. What word are you using? What phrase are you using? What does PBIS mean? But not everybody feels that way. And so we want to limit the intimidation that a family or a parent might have about having those conversations with somebody that they feel educationally is above them. And then on top of that, there's a challenge that maybe they're embarrassed about, or they're overwhelmed and they don't know how to navigate it. We want to try to remove all those barriers, meet students where they are, but also meet our parents where they are. I think that's our job as a community and certainly as a school district.
And I just want to tag on to that, our job as a board. My background primarily is in education research, education technology development. I have had some insight into schools, and I have spent a lot of time speaking with our teachers and speaking with families to identify mental health as one of the larger issues. The board can't solve this problem. The board can bring the people into the room who need to be there to solve this problem. That is our primary role, is to say, this is a priority. We need to bring in our social workers, we need to bring in our staff psychologists, we need to bring in parents, we need to bring in students. And we need to come together around this to identify other resources as well. Bring in the mental health board, have them come in as part of the conversations. That is fundamentally one of the strongest things that the board can do for this, is say, this is important. We need to have all the adults in the room to have the right conversation, to identify what we need to do, who needs the extra support. Do we need extra social workers? Do we need more staff psychologists? Do we need to have better links to what's going on out in the community? So these are the type of things that we can identify and actually make work if we bring the right people in the room to talk about the idea and come up with an implementation plan.
Okay, thank you much. Next question, Vincent, we'll start with you. Tangential to the last conversation about mental health, the impact of social media and smartphones on our students. Where do you stand on smartphones in the school? Would you ban smartphones in the school, or are there some ways where you think they could be implemented?
I was ready for this question. So I think smartphones shouldn't be in schools. They have a very, very small value, to me, in my opinion, in my experience. They have small value. It's disruptive to the learning environment. What I like is a policy that, so like our 8th grader has a phone. We follow the policy where it's away for the day because we need it from a family to coordinate after school activities. But my 8th grader doesn't need to have his phone during the day. He is, as we tell them, he is no one's emergency contact. He isn't. Like, no one's gonna call him and say, like, hey, I need this thing. And so it's important for us to also make sure that if we're gonna have a policy where no smartphones, we are also enforcing it. In order to enforce it, we need to make sure we're supporting our teachers, because as we've said before, there is nothing worse if you are a teacher where there is a policy and then you enforce it and a kid is disrespectful to you and you don't get supported. No one comes to work every day to be disrespected by kids, but also on the kid end, it's also tough when there's inconsistency in enforcement, because now a kid doesn't know, is this the rule on Monday, but not on Tuesday? So I think, how do we actually push forward so that, and I'll give much credit to the team at Brooks. They've done an amazing job this year in terms of enforcing the cell phone policy. Like, we had a couple kids over who were complaining that, like, their phone got taken, and I was like, well, tell me the rule. They're like, well, after 3 times it gets taken. If they catch you for 3 times, then the 4th time, your parents have to pick it up. And I was like, and you're upset by this? To me, I would say, like, after the 1st time, you had 3 additional warnings. But it's good in their complaint, they were articulating, they understood the consequence, and the consequence was being, they were being held accountable for it. In regards to social media, I don't have great answers. I think that social media is tough and difficult. Like, I'm a big fan of The Anxious Generation, where he talks about the rise of social media in teen mental health. I don't know how to combat the issue, the negatives of social media, with the reality that for some kids, they grew up on it. So it's hard to, if you're a parent, you can make different decisions, but when 60% of the kids are on social media, it's tough when your kid's like, hey, I wanna do this thing. Everyone's in this realm that I'm not in. But to be very succinct, I think that, like, for D97, we should be very firm in cell phones don't belong in schools, whether we do away for the day or we do some type of cell phone home. I think that's the answer. Tangentially, I teach sexual health to 8th graders for Oak Park Owl. We didn't have a cell phone policy last spring, and the number of times we had to remind kids to put their phones away was like 30% of our class. This year, we told kids and families, from the moment kids walk in, they put their name badge on and they hang up their phones. it has been the greatest experience for me as an instructor because we don't talk about phones, and it actually pushes kids to actually be fully engaged in each other because they're not trying to live in multiple worlds.
Nancy and then Venus.
So this is my area. I'm going to date myself a little bit and say I started working in education research when the web was just a new thing, and we were all trying to figure it out and how to make it benefit students and not distract them, and oh, what websites are they seeing and how do we make that work? Phones are a tool. They have all sorts of great applications. I also worked for a very short stint in advertising before I decided it was kind of crushing my soul, and I know that they can be sticky and be designed to be sticky and be designed to capture your attention. And that's a lot to ask of a middle schooler to put it down because we're talking, to put it down because we're learning. Because what my game is on there. My friends might be texting me. So I am in general in support of Away for the Day. There are some students, for example, who use glucose monitors. There are some students who use them for emotional regulation. There are exceptions to that rule. And I think one of the things we have to do is make sure we are being very clear with the adults in the room of who can have them, because the worst thing you can do is have a student say, why do they get their phone? And they're like, yeah, you need to give me your phone. And they're like, but I'm supposed to have it, right? So that's one of the tricky pieces in that. But more than that, more than Away for the Day, because I do think that that is important so they can have their focus on education, I think we personally teach media literacy way too late. High school is not soon enough. Kids are on technology way before then. We all know this. Why are we waiting until high school to teach them to be savvy about what's going on? Back in my day, it was in high school and in middle school, the media literacy was, hey, all those images you see of people, they're all Photoshopped, they're all airbrushed, so don't try to live up to that standard. Now it's gotten way more complex. Waiting till high school is just too much to try to get kids to understand what's going on. And now we have AI even coming into the mix. How do you teach kids to be savvy about what is real and what isn't? And we really need to start looking at that well before they are out of middle school. So my quick answer to that is, I think during the day, during school, you need to be away from it unless there is a specific reason that you need to be using it, because it is a tool and it may have an application for a particular student. But beyond that, in the larger picture, I think we need to introduce more media literacy components for students in the middle school, even lightly in elementary school, and provide more supports for parents on what they can do.
Thank you. Venus, Becky?
So I remember parents and teachers coming to the school and saying Away for the Day doesn't work. And it didn't work. It was a policy that was poorly implemented, and that was confusing for principals, administrators, for teachers. We didn't change our policy. We still have the same policy. It's Away for the Day. What we did do was, it was clear that this was an issue. It was clear that we had lots of our community members coming to our board meetings and telling us that this was an issue. So our superintendent and administrators educated the principals, who then educated the teachers about consistency in implementing the policy. And so if you look at what was happening last year to what's happening this year, and bringing in those new sixth graders and being very crystal clear about implementation of this policy and what that means and what the consequences are, that has made a huge, huge difference. We have not had, and for me, public comment and when community members come to the board is a huge litmus test of whether or not something is working. Because if you don't have a problem with it, you're not going to come tell me. You will come tell the board when it is an issue. And that's the process, and that's how it works, and it should work that way. That's fine. So we know that Away for the Day is working because we fixed what was wrong with the implementation of that policy. There are consequences for students. Some teachers have phone homes, but if the student doesn't put their phone in the phone home, it's away in their bag somewhere. And so that has really made a huge difference. No teacher wants to compete with TikTok. It's too hard. And it's been designed to be addictive. I've yet to see a reading curriculum book be designed to be addictive. So I'm glad that it is working. I'm glad that we as a community came together in a board and the administration to fix a problem. And now we are in a better place with regard to cell phones in the classroom. And there are certain opportunities or instances where it's important for a kid to have their phone. But for the most part, they don't need their phone. They also have a laptop or a Chromebook. So they don't need Google on their phone. They have a Chromebook. They can get the same answers they need from a different place. With regard to social media, I think social media plays very much into the mental health of our students. When I was in school, if you wanted to fight me, I've never been in a fight, by the way, but if two kids wanted to fight, they met after school. And maybe the word spread that kids were fighting, and there was a group gathered. Now it's being recorded. And the kids are just watching it being recorded. And it's spreading differently. The way telephone is lightning fast now, whereas it used to not be that way. And you also probably didn't get the same information because it wasn't being, telephone. It changes as as the message is being delivered. That really does play a big role in kids' mental health, because if they make a mistake or if they do something, then the school knows about it. Everyone in the school will know about it in a very short period of time. And that is just detrimental to students' mental health. The other piece of that is that, and I remember having this conversation with my kids, why are people standing around recording something as opposed to trying to help mitigate whatever situation is happening? I don't expect somebody to jump in and get harmed, but it really bothers me that this generation of kids are standby observers and voyeurs, frankly, as opposed to actively being involved in what's going on around them. So I think that's my answer.
Okay, thank you. Becky?
Kind of just to look at, I'm definitely in agreement with a lot of the points that have been made. A couple highlights just from the school-based experience. I can speak to the fact that we do have conversations with kids about, healthy use of social media or technology use. We do have in K-5, and I believe even beyond, is second step is kind of that universal curriculum that teachers are implementing at least once a week, talking about how not to be a bystander, how to advocate for each other if we're noticing there's bullying. But what I'm hearing is that now we have quicker ways and sometimes tech-savvy ways in which we are bullying each other or hurting each other's feelings. So it's all about relationships, I think, at the end of the day. So I am glad that the district has implemented that idea of a universal curriculum in terms of second step. I have talked at other forums about this idea of screening students in regards to social emotional learning and what are some of the areas where they're struggling with. I would love to see us consider the way we screen for reading issues, the way we screen for math and writing even sometimes. How are we doing that to understand how kids are coming into our schools? When it comes to technology, the high school currently I can speak to has a teacher-driven policy in which it was, voted upon, and people really stood up and said, hey, we're going to have a phone home in every single classroom, and we're all going to follow the same policy. And everybody makes a pledge. It's sent to the parents. And so it's very integrated. Is it still something that they're working on? Absolutely. If you have a high school age child at this point. I also would like to say, can that be done within the middle school and the K-5 setting? I believe so. If it's teacher driven, if it's, the buy-in comes in from within the building, I think that is something to help. I have heard in the opposite direction that we don't want to completely eliminate technology because this is also how we get some students to read at home. We have licenses so kids are able to access things like Raz Kids or Lexia, which again have specific licenses that allow kids to be able to read at home. Moby Max, which is about using it for enhancing some math skills. So we have a lot of technology. We are 21st century learners, and I want to say it was probably during the Obama administration that a lot of grants and funds were plugged into public schools in efforts to get our kids all this one-to-one devices. So do they need their phone if they have a one-to-one device set up? They don't. But I will say this is how kids are making friends. And so we have to have that conversation when we have that conversation about eliminating phones, because this is how kids are talking to each other.
Thank you, thank you. Nancy, next question for you. I want to shift to talking about our teachers. Considering the landscape or the competitive landscape rather, for qualified educators, what are your thoughts on ways that we can attract, support, and retain our educators in our schools?
So first I want to say I am really happy to see, as we've come through the pandemic and several years out, we are now retaining our teachers at a higher rate than the average of Illinois. We are almost back up to 90% retention rate, which is an amazing retention rate for teachers in a district. So we are doing some things right in that way. One of our bargaining goals, things we live by, it's not really even a goal, it's more of a stance, is that we look at our comparative districts in Illinois, and we need to be in the top quartile. We, in terms of salaries, in terms of compensation, one of the things that we look at is, with actually all of our bargaining units, is where are we in comparison to our peers? Another piece we can do is making sure that we are promoting teacher collaboration, that we are making spaces for teachers to share professional development together, to work together, because working isolated in a classroom is generally not the choice of a teacher. They don't go into this so they can just sit isolated in a classroom with kids all day and then never talk to anybody else. They're excited and they're passionate about education, so making sure that we support that we support their growth. Along with that, we support their growth. I have spent a lot of time looking at other districts' contracts. They are very simple. Show up, we will pay you, you can go home at the end of the day. We'll ask you to do some leadership roles as part of this, but that's it. We actually pay for those roles. We have a very elaborate list of things that we pay extra for because we think it's important. We have one of the top national teacher certification compensation pieces of any district in the state. I'm trying to think of the other piece I was just about to say. We gave the highest COVID stipends, or at least one of the highest COVID stipends, through our ESSER funds to our teachers. And I think that shows in the fact that we have retained so many of our teachers past COVID. And beyond that, I think we can show respect to our teachers. We can make sure that we understand that they are professionals. I hear from folks sometimes, offhand and usually not so much in Oak Park, well, I was a student. I know how to educate. I know what it means to be in a classroom. Yes, and teachers are professionals who go through a lot of training and do a lot of work and learn a lot as they are doing their job to be professional educators. And I think that's one of the words we need to add in front of educators and teachers every time we use it: a professional teacher, a professional educator. One of the things we can do to keep them is to say, we respect you as a professional educator. When we are doing curriculum changes, we can make sure that you are part of the process, a significant part. And that is the case with our literacy piece, and it is already the case with our Math K-5 program that we're looking at right now. We can, when we see problems and behavior issues, say, we're not just gonna say, admin, go fix this. We're gonna say, admin, go work with the teachers to figure out what's going on and how we can help this. So I think the biggest thing we can do is make sure they're paid they're in comparison to our peers. We can make sure that they're respected, and we can make sure that they're included.
Thank you. Vincent?
Sorry, can you repeat the question again?
Thoughts on ways to attract, support, and retain our educators within the district?
Sure, thank you. I think in terms of attracting, it is very easy for districts like Oak Park to think that we have 5 openings, we post them on our website, and people are going to apply. I always tell people, unless you're Facebook or Google, no one's just going to your website. It's just not how it works anymore. So I'd almost love to think through, like, how are we actually, what are we doing to attract teachers? So if there's an amazing teacher who is unhappy at their school and they're outside of St. Louis, how do they know about Oak Park? In the same way that you see it in terms of like tourism, I think that's how you can push forward of like getting the different perspective and diversity of teachers, because we will have no problem getting people who graduated from the local schools, but if we're really going to recruit the best and brightest, we've got to make sure there's a dedicated person who's a recruiter for the district. And once we recruit people, how are we also thinking through like their experience? So like, whose job is it at the district level, not just the building principal, but at the district level to think about the employee experience, not just talking about compensation, because that'll be taken care of with the new contract, but my experience as a teacher, do I feel like I have everything I need to be successful? Do I feel like there's professional growth opportunities for me? Do I feel like my principal and administration is invested in my success? Do I feel like my principal is accessible? Like those types of things is the way that we can like retain teachers. People generally don't leave places they love. Like if you've been fortunate, and I know I have, I've been fortunate to work at places where like when I had to leave, it was one of the hardest days of my life because I was leaving a family, I was leaving something that meant so much to me. How are we creating those experiences for our teachers? And some of it is, especially with the new curriculum, the curriculum's great, and I'll say it again, it's great, but it's more about how are we going to train and support our teachers to make sure that curriculum is used so we can really have good student outcomes. Because I'm a former teacher, I still feel like I'm a teacher. You get into teaching because you really want to impact student lives, but you don't want to deal with all the other junk that gets in the way between me and my kids in my classroom. So how are we always thinking through what are the things that like teachers are doing that have nothing to do with like teaching and learning and getting better? Let's get rid of that so teachers can really do their job and they're not doing things that are just fundamentally just a waste of their time and not pushing kids forward.
Thank you. Venus?
I think two of the things that we do right, and we do review peer district data. We attract top talent by offering them a competitive salary. We also attract top talent by we have a healthy student to teacher ratio, and that is contractual. Where I think, and I'm going to disagree with you on this one, Vincent. I don't want to add another FTE as a recruiter for teaching, but for teachers. But I think we employ the tools even outside of the district that will attract teachers from across the country, and certainly across the Midwest. Where we are challenged, and Nancy spoke about, our retention has improved. However, the place where our retention has not improved is with our teachers of color. We are not able to retain our teachers of color. And as our student population continues to be diverse, the teacher population needs to mirror our student population. So that's an area where we have some work to do. I think there is a lot of value and benefit in having a more diverse, culturally diverse teacher population. And we have to work to try to achieve that. All the things, many of the things are available to our teachers. Our teachers are very well resourced. We have lots of teachers that step up and decide to do the national certification, which is really challenging. And each year we honor them, and we ask them to continue. We ask them to use that experience as teacher leaders in our buildings. Hey, what'd you learn? How can that benefit our district? So we have a really great teacher population. At the board table, our schools will come in and do presentations about curriculum and the plans that they have to implement through the school year. And the excitement that we can see from our teachers is awesome. Those are actually my favorite board meetings, when our building leaders come in with teachers and share with us what they're doing and the school pride that they have. So we really have some awesome teachers. We just need to continue to add to what we have and make sure that those teachers, like I said, mirror our student population.
Thank you. And Becky?
So I can speak to, as a person that, you know, is now in the high school and did actually leave, I would say there is some brain drain that happens in D97 for teachers of color. To some extent, is this idea of going to the place where you're going to feel a sense of community, a sense of acceptance, not being the squeaky wheel when it comes to social justice issues or equity issues, I think is important to consider as to why sometimes teachers of color or people of color may leave. I think in my sense, you know, I had a wonderful experience. I think all of the teachers are very talented, but I do think, you know, upward mobility also for very talented staff. How do you do something more challenging when you do have a doctorate or you're nationally board certified? I have heard opportunities for that to take place, but that also meant taking resources like from kids, from direct service to kids. So here's an opportunity, but now you're going to be behind a desk or behind a, you know, like more of an administrative job. So that is a challenge for me. So we want upward mobility, but we also want opportunities to be able to not take services from kids that need it, like reading interventions and math interventionists. The other layer of it, I would say, is, you know, you don't, as a person of color, want to be the one that is teaching all the other people about equity within the building. And when I started in my first, you know, 6 years, you know, stint in the district, at that time, our superintendent was, one, really trying to beef up the number of employees that were representative of our community, and we still haven't hit that number, right? I mean, the vast majority of our teachers do not often represent the diversity of our student community, both obviously socioeconomically, language, immigration status, and race. So, but when being brought into some of those cohorts, we all got trained. We got some, you know, opportunities to work with someone that was going to help us kind of build a sense of, we're pushing these ideas of social justice, you know, and making sure that we're being culturally responsive with all the children that we're serving, even if we don't feel like we identify, we have to serve all kids. And at the end of the day, that was short-lived. You know, you get the 2-year, like, hey, mentorship, and then it was like, maybe we'll sprinkle a few trainings here and there, and it kind of died out. So as a person that experienced the training, I do feel like it fizzled. So what I was brought into was like, we believe in equity, we believe in this mission statement, but we're not always training you to have these conversations. And as a person of color, I didn't need more trainings. I just wanted to engage in more healthy conversations with my colleagues in which I wasn't the one facilitating them. I do believe that all of our teachers are well-intentioned, so it's not a criticism of our staff, it's just an observation of how do we support that growth. And now at the national level, we're talking about taking funding from anyone that talks about equity or social justice. And so that can be very concerning for me as a future potential board member, is how do we keep that going?
Okay. Thank you much. Venus, next question for you. Reader questions about the candidate assessment of Superintendent Shaw, who received a 2-year contract extension. How do you measure success going forward, not only for the superintendent, but for their immediate support staff? So the assessment of the current superintendent, and how do you measure success of the superintendent and their immediate support staff going forward?
So when we hired Dr. Shaw, there were some identified goals and identified challenges that we had in the school district. We wanted to make sure that those were addressed and they were built into her overall goals as a superintendent. So all 7 of us agreed, as well as Dr. Shaw, and we look at those goals. What is almost every meeting or every other meeting, correct me if I'm wrong, we're looking at progress toward those goals. Where are we? How do we make sure that we're going to be able to measure those, we're going to achieve the goal as we've identified. Some of it is operational, some of it's administrative. Certainly we want to work on making sure that we are improving. Ultimately, we want to improve the scores of our students, right? But what does that look like? What does that mean? It's layered. There's lots of things and lots of obstacles that are put in the way of not only the teacher, but also the student. How do we make sure that we are operationally removing some of those obstacles so a kid can teach and a kid can learn and a teacher can teach? So Dr. Shaw looked at our district, made some changes, certainly in the middle school, shifted some things around to remove those obstacles so that we can improve our scores. Our sense of belonging is one set of scores. It's called the panorama data, but also our standardized testing scores and the scores within the building. I mentioned earlier when the principals come in and do their school presentations, we've seen early data that we are improving on those scores overall and also for the focal cohorts. So we're moving in the right direction. And at the end of the year, we do an evaluation of our superintendent, and it's very formal. And we talk about what worked, what didn't work, how we're going to make changes, and how we're going to collaborate and work together.
We'll go Vincent and then Nancy.
Yeah, I think as an outsider citizen, it's hard to really give a better answer. I think Nancy and Venus, as current board members, have a better understanding of like what the goals were. And as a potential member, I respect the fact that if they believe the performance is warranted a 2-year extension, I respect that.
Nancy.
I appreciate that. So to carry on to what Venus said, she kind of touched on this, but I want to emphasize it. You can work to have great test scores, but poor learners. It is possible to set yourselves up so your district scores amazingly well on tests, but your students aren't really ready to learn, to be explorers, to go out and think. So it is really important, in addition to those test scores that we do want to see shift, to look at things like the panorama data that Venus mentioned. Do kids feel like they belong here? How are they feeling about the piece? To talk to D200, thanks to one of our board members, Gavin Carney, and Senator Don Harmon, we are able to now share data between D27 and D200. That is a recent development. It seems odd that it's a recent development, but if you are not in a unified school district for student data protection, they would not allow you to share that. They have now set it up so that feeder schools can actually share data and vice versa, so we can look longitudinally to see how are students doing once they get out of our schools? How are things working when they get to the high school? Are we seeing students struggle? Anecdotally, we have heard that students are struggling. Now we can look at it and really say, are we improving? What's our baseline? Are we improving that? And I think that's one of the critical goals for success long-term for Dr. Shaw and for the district is, are we meeting that? To Venus's point again, we started off with goals that we devised together and with the community to see what do we expect of our students? How do we think we can reach those score changes? How do we think we can actually create those learners? And please feel free to tune in to the board meetings. Mostly at the start of every meeting, we get presentations on those. If you are not up for that, if you are not already subscribed to the board newsletter, we now have a board summary newsletter that recaps all of the meetings, which is a new component. We also now post all of the presentations online. You no longer have to sit and watch a board meeting and do screen captures if you want to grab data. It is all there for you to use. And I think that's one of the most important things that we've added is a component where our superintendent can present things and people can come back and ask questions meaningfully, not try to skim through and have to go back through the video. They can get those pieces. I'm kind of digressing, I realize, from evaluation component, but I think that is one of the pieces that helps us inform the community of what our superintendent is doing. And so I'm trying to get the word out there that those things are out there for people to use as resources to learn what's going on.
Thank you. Becky?
To add to that, I would say just, one of the joys of my, professional learner hat, always learning. I can't say that I envy the position of the superintendent. It is a very demanding job. So obviously, for those that reach that level of authority and leadership, more power to them. The challenge is, how do you balance that when people disagree with you? And so we did get to see the superintendent the previous year kind of backtrack on a decision to change, some staffings. I think that was probably a humbling experience, and I think that that's good leadership in the sense that we can change our mind about things. I think that's important. We heard the community, and this is the direction we're going to head. I do think that what I learned about it in the process, though, was that communication was not as clear and transparent and potentially even as upfront as it was desired. And so I do think that one of the things that I would love to see and hold our superintendent accountable for would be, how do we go from talking theory and the ethereal, because she's an intellect, she's wonderful, I can tell, a very smart person, and bring it down to the community and make it accessible. Having a why is absolutely critical when we're making decisions that impact children, that impact teachers, that impact the community. So I think that's what I would like to see. Obviously, I love this idea of looking data. I love data. That's my bread and butter. But I also want to see this improvement of relationships and teacher morale, which I think was really questionable. I think layered with the idea of a contract that needed to be completed, which sounds like they've worked really hard to get to a good place. So on top of potential staffing changes. So I think we just got to think about context in which this superintendent is working in, because I lived through the other one. I know there's plenty of teachers that have seen many people come through and they bring in their own people and then they switch everything up. And the goal is always to build community, transparency, and honesty.
Thank you. Becky, we'll stick with you for next question here. A lot of questions submitted about the potential impact of what we're seeing from the Trump administration at the federal level and what that could look like locally. Can you give us a sense of, if the federal government and agencies come after anything related to equity, DEI, LGBTQ plus rights, or a migrant population, how will you advise the board and the district to navigate that? And will you stand by policies that are already in place to support those communities?
Absolutely. I feel like we need to stand our ground and resist in ways that are important when it comes to what the vision is for our district. If we are serving a diverse community, if we are intentional about our equity mission and vision, then our goal is not to scale back our social justice curriculum, not to scale back on trying to diversify our teaching staff. And again, everyone brings value. A teacher is a noble profession. I genuinely feel that we have a lot of great people, but if we do want to push the needle on how do we build community and how do we create a sense of belonging, we do want kids to know, like, hey, I can be a teacher one day, right? Because everybody looks or can find someone in the sea of people that looks like them and talks like them. I see my little son nodding even though he's got his headphones on. And I think the other layer of it is, obviously, I feel really torn on so many things regarding our transgendered population, obviously our LGBTQ community members. I feel like what we're doing is going back in time, and saying, those gender equity plans we created, those respecting our students and how they identify, we're going backwards in some school districts. And I would hope that we would continue to implement plans that honor what students are identifying as. And obviously most of those have been both, collaborative with students and families. So I think there's this misnomer that things are happening in a vacuum and we're not asking for parent feedback or family feedback. So I do want us to continue in the direction of resisting in a way of saying, like, we had a reason why we invested resources, money, people, and conversations around social justice and equity for a variety of reasons. We obviously are also a community that welcomed asylum seekers, and none of those plans can exist without funding and without community support. So it's also a collaboration with the community, the village board, and other entities to make sure that our school district is able to uphold some of those pieces so that we are a welcoming environment for all students.
Thank you. Venus?
I think this is where my desire to fight is the strongest. Thankfully, we have a governor as well as a state superintendent that align with our values as a school district and as a community. We fought really hard to make space for some of the student voices to be heard that were marginalized, and we're not going back. We're not. I don't know where this was born out of. I don't really care what it is born out of, but this is not who we are as a community. This is not who we are as a state. Really, this is not who we are as a country, but I'll let others fight that fight. I think that we have to fight. We are not changing who we are. We are not, as adults, we have to stand in the gap for our students. The Trump administration and now this dismantling of the Department of Education, and I'm trying to manage my mental health with regard to the news. So I thought I saw something about signing an order about dismantling the Department of Education. Yes, you're nodding your heads. So we knew this was coming. Thankfully, the way that we're funded in the state, the majority of our funds come from property taxes. We do get some federal funds, and that's going to affect programs. We have to think creatively, but we don't have to do anything differently in terms of who we're supporting. We just have to be creative about the resources that we do have.
Vincent?
I agree with what Becky and Venus said. This is a time for us to really show our kids what values mean. Like, our values are under attack. And I think that, like, even though we can disagree in our community about leaf collection and overnight parking, I think when it comes to supporting and protecting all of our citizens of the village, there should be no dispute. I think that, like, the board has done a great job so far in the last couple of years of affirming student individuality, and I commit, if I'm elected, that, like, we're, to Venus's point, we're not going back. It's almost a better time to double down on our values, because our kids, just in the same way our kids have been watching the last couple forums, our kids are going to watch how we respond in times like this. So I think it's really important for us to, like, be strong and united as a community.
Nancy?
So no disagreement here. My dad was in emergency management for many, many years, and he was all about the planning. I am not so different from my dad in that way, and I also love a good spreadsheet. So when this started coming down in November, I put together a spreadsheet of federal laws that protect our students, state laws that protect our students, board policy that protects our students, so that I could see where are the gaps, because changing our vision, changing our board equity policy is not an option. We welcome all of our students. We support them as they are. And this is the time to make sure that they know that they know that they belong, that they are part of the district, and that we care about each and every one of them, and they do not need to change for us. That is not an option, and it's not needed. One of the reassuring pieces of this was, being in Illinois, we have a lot of very strong state laws. In addition to Governor Pritzker being in place, we also have the Illinois Human Rights Act. We have the Illinois Student Data Protection Act. All of these shore up the work that we have in our policies. And in terms of funding, as Venus mentioned, we are thankfully not as deeply hit as many in the state would be if federal funding starts drying up. I think the average in the state is around 12%. We are around 5 to 6% of our funding comes from federal sources. Some of those you would hope they would keep, like federal lunch programs, although now I'm kind of dubious about that based on some of the earlier conversations. But that is where coming together as a community, we have FORC, which is our financial committee that is made up of very talented members of our community, where working intergovernmentally will come into play to say, how do we keep our core? How do we keep our beliefs? I was at a collaboration for early childhood meeting the other day, and brilliantly, they put forward changing our plans, changing our equity pieces is not an option. So we just have to figure out how to work around the funding. We have to figure out how to make that happen. And I think we are in the same boat of working with the community, being transparent about it, and making sure that our core pieces, our instruction, our fundamental belief in the arts, our students are still welcome and belong, and our equity policy stands. It's not going anywhere. And I'll also add in, we also recently added the American Library Association Library Bill of Rights, for example, to our piece, that you have a right to read. And so we have a lot of strong pieces in our policy that I think fundamentally we all strongly support and are not going anywhere.
Okay. Nancy, we're actually going to stick with you. Impact of state funding. If something happens at the state level, how do you feel about the current finances of the district and what would happen in the event of some type of downturn or decrease in state funding?
Sure. So District 97 has a lot of really solid fiscal policies in place. One is that we must maintain a 3 to 6 month fund balance. I will say this is a cautionary tale is up in Evanston right now. They are in talks with the state with them possibly taking over because they have been deficit spending for a very long time now. And they are not in a robust state to actually handle any downturn in the economy or any shift in funding pieces. Because we are very cognizant of what our budget is, and we are very cognizant that it is part of property taxes, which we all pay, including the board members, we are very attentive to what is in our budget. If there is a slight downturn, we are in a good, stronger position to handle it. If there is a deep downturn in conjunction with federal funding, we are still in a fiscally strong place to be. However, we will need to make sure we are working with FORC, working with the community. When I say community, I should add that I don't just mean the larger community. I mean our internal D97 community, our teachers, our unions, as well as the larger D97, or the larger Oak Park community, to see what we need to do to shift our budget to stay robust and solvent. Because again, going bankrupt is not an option for us, nor should it be. And I think one of the pieces is making sure that we are keeping on top of our budget. We always do. We get budget funding pieces weekly. We go through them. We make sure they're all good. We look at budget targets. But I think more so than in past years, having budget justifications, looking at the different pieces of where does this fit in instruction? Where does this impact our students? How does this actually serve the mission of our students? Is it going to become even more imperative if we have to make cuts?
Okay. Vincent?
Yeah, the funding concern, if there is a downturn for either state or federal funding, it's a national. My friends who are principals and superintendents, it's what everyone is stressed about. And trying to think through how do you actually plan for next school year, not knowing what's actually guaranteed versus what's going to be negotiated versus what's going to be threatened if people don't comply with whatever is publicized tomorrow. I'm glad we're in a good financial place as a district. I'd always prioritize, like, how do we make sure that our number one priority is protecting the classroom and protecting support for kids? And then so it's priority one is protecting the classroom. From there, we just don't know. Like if it's 1% versus 7%, those are two crazy swings, but I think it will take a group effort for all stakeholders involved to be able to like do that. I think you guys are doing a good job of essentially not taking the max levy. That's also going to be something on the table as well. Of like one of the ways you're going to have to fill that gap is by taking the max, probably in consecutive years, to be able to backfill that gap, but also still not knowing, is this like a short-term thing or is there going to be a long-term financial deficits? The only saving grace is that like essentially all schools are in this together. Like regardless of red versus blue, all schools, I can tell you, are terrified right now of what's going to happen. And that's one of the problems, I think it's one of the questionnaires, is it's one of the issues we're having nationally, is like there's just a lot of uncertainty in our country, especially when it comes around Department of Education being eliminated, but also what does that actually mean, especially for our students who are getting like Title I dollars, federal lunch money, as well as IDA, which is for students with disabilities. So I think it's a huge unknown that it's going to take a lot of like patience and hopefully goodwill that we don't have to be in that case. But if we are, it's going to be devastating for a lot of districts around the country.
Venus?
Similar to what Nancy said, we operate in a very fiscally responsible way, and we also communicate that to the community. I serve, one of the board committees I serve on is FORC, which is the Financial Oversight and Review Committee, and it's made up of community members, and we share information with them. Before we present budgets and vote on them, they are reviewing them, asking questions. It is part of our policy to have somewhere between 3 and 6 months fund balance reserves. And that's consistent with our peer school districts as well. To the best of our ability, we have planned for sort of an economic downturn or whatever changes might be happening nationally or in our state. I couldn't have predicted this. So we will take our direction from our governor as well as from our state superintendent, but we have to keep our knees bent on this. Once we are out of this immediate, very stressful, anxiety-producing administration, I would like to see us create a not-for-profit arm where we are raising funds and those funds go directly to our schools to help us meet any gaps that we might have. Similar to, I think we all know how much money D200 has for Imagine. When that was happening, I remember I asked our district attorney, I'm like, is there any reason D97 can't have its own not-for-profit and that we can fundraise and perhaps apply for grants, although applying for grants doesn't really count right now. So long-term, I would like to see us develop a D97 not-for-profit or fund that will help us do the things that we want to do, but also fill the gaps should there be some economic downturns. It's a little late now, but that's something I'd like to see when we know more. Right now, we just have to keep our knees bent, and we're building the plane as we're flying it, is the honest answer.
Okay, Becky?
I will just add to Vitas's points. I'm actually aligned with those thoughts because I do think we'd have to think creatively. A lot of the decisions as of yet and a lot of the conversations in the last, year, a little more so, in watching the board meetings has been about this idea of school enrollment, right? Student enrollment. And right after the pandemic, we had, to some extent, some exodus into like schools that were opening earlier and they didn't come back. And so that idea of how we've been driven to fund things based on student enrollment and how much we spend, that's been part of the national conversation. It's like, oh, we spend X number of dollars compared to other developing countries, but here we are, we are a massive country. We have literally states that could be their own country comparably, on the other side of the world. So I don't think we can compare at all to what we've been maintaining historically in terms of public funding for education. But I do strongly believe in it. I believe that, that is the core of what we've been doing. But I also look along the lines of this idea of grant writing. There are private foundations, there are endowments. It's how universities, to some extent, are going to have to operate. So this idea of potentially developing a nonprofit, I like that. I also like this idea of, how people are going to show up for their communities when they do have foundations, nonprofits, and we are not writing federal grants to fund things, to close the gaps.
Okay, we're almost done. Get you folks out of here as close on time as possible. Final question. This is lightning roundish, if you will. So try to keep your answers 60 seconds or around that, so we can get folks out of here on time. Becky, thoughts on standardized tests?
Where they came from, I don't love the concept, but I am a school psychologist. We use them all the time to make decisions because you need to kind of take out the biases associated with personal judgment and anecdotal data. So there's pros and cons to it. However, a lot of the decision-making related to funding, related to state report cards and regulation has been driven by standardized tests. And we know historically from, an equity lens, they haven't always been fair. So I do believe that we can't eliminate them completely because they do make some sense when you're properly trained to deliver them, to analyze the data and pull it apart along with social emotional data, student community belonging data. All of those pieces I think are still very relevant to the dialogue. We should definitely be measuring growth in reading, math. We don't do as well in writing, but I do believe that those things are still fundamentally necessary.
Standardized testing is sort of a necessary evil, and it's an important tool. It helps us know where we are and perhaps where we want to go, but it definitely does not replace progress in the classroom and that teacher-student relationship and how individuals in the building can help a student soar. A standardized test isn't going to do that for you, but a teacher will.
Vincent?
I would agree with Venus as well. They're a necessary evil. I think it's one of multiple tools that can be used to assess student learning. I think that we should be probably thinking through how much we're testing kids, and we should only be testing kids if we're using those results to drive instruction. If we are just part of some testing sequence where we're not using that to really change things, it doesn't matter. But the value of standardized tests allows us to identify gaps, and that's how we got to this new curriculum pilot, as well as we need standardized tests in some ways, because if you look at great schools or other ratings, that's actually the data that people are pulling to determine school district performance, which drives property value, which is the easiest way for people to decide where they want to send their school. So I think, yes, we need tests, but I think that should be one measure in addition to portfolios and other ways that we're assessing student learning.
And Nancy?
So I'm looking at you, IAR, right now, because I really wish we had one test to rule them all. One test that we could actually use to both meet the needs of the state testing, meet the needs of comparative to state and for funding, and get the in-depth data that we need to actually make a standardized test useful for our students, for actually helping them for learning about more of the details about what can best support them, where there might be shortfalls, and what extra supports might be needed. Unfortunately, that test does not exist, which is why we have a couple, and I don't love. But they are, again, to quote everyone here, a necessary evil. I also, as I stated earlier, think they are one component. If you're relying only on standardized tests, that's a huge problem. Especially from a district evaluation level. So the state, sure, they have a little harder time using the closer data, but as a district, if we were saying we are ruling everything based on these standardized tests, I would stand up and scream. I would not be in favor of that in any way, and I think it is important to have a well-rounded look at what our students need, what they're doing, and what supports are needed in the classroom.
Okay. And final question, Nancy, we'll stick with you. Wrap it up. Talking to the voters here, watching at home, and the election coverage throughout the remainder of the campaign. Why should voters vote for you?
So I bring decades of education research and in-classroom experience. I bring informal education experience with museums as well, where I've had to work with budgets under duress. And I will say, one of the pieces I love about Venus's comment earlier was having a foundation is great to supplement, but we need to be able, I've worked at too many museums to say we can rely on that. We need to have a budget that actually works within our means to cover the core areas. Because otherwise what you end up with is you have nothing to do but cut staff when those grants shift direction, or when eggs are $10 and people can't give to the foundation. So I bring that experience to look at how to deal with budgets when they have to be tight. And the library will close in 30 minutes. And I've put 4 years into building connections in the district, into getting to know teachers, into spending time at Julian and Irving and Lincoln and going to different schools to say, hey, what's going on here? Let's listen, let's talk, let's come together. I've spent time with the admin, I've spent time with parents. People know that they see me on the street, they will stop me and I will talk as long as they want to talk and listen. I've been at all the events, Juneteenth, Day in Our Village, and I have spent a lot of time building, again, connections within the community. And I sincerely believe the most important thing in our district right now to help our students is for all the adults in the room, admin, teachers, parents, the community, to come together, to have these hard conversations and work collaboratively for our students. And I think I've set up a good way to do that over 4 years, and I'd like a chance to keep going.
Okay. Thank you. Vincent, same question. Why should voters vote for you?
Thank you. I think I have 20 years of direct experience in school, so I've worked in affluent areas in New Jersey. So I started my career in Montclair, which is very similar to Oak Park, and I also have been a school principal on the south side of Chicago. So I think in terms of like diversity of experience in working with students and families, I think that this has prepared me for that. I wanted to run because I'm driven by service, and I think that there are spaces in the district that I can provide value. And just thinking in the last year, the blowback from the staffing changes, I remember reading that and wishing I could have done more, as well as like, how can we prevent the situation last year when like the Julian teachers essentially said they didn't feel safe? And like, I want to be on the board so I can essentially be there to help provide my experience and perspective so that everyone feels like they're safe at work, but also they're able to do their best work. I also think I'm qualified to do this because I like to believe I'm a really good teammate. And looking at the current construction of the board, I think I could fit right in and provide value, but also be a good person. Like, I'm generally an extrovert. I'm an extrovert's extrovert. So I have no problem like working on any team. And I'm looking also forward to being very present in the community and being someone who's like super approachable. So if people have concerns, they can bring them to me, but also I can be a resource as well.
Okay. Venus, same question. Why should voters vote for you?
I think Nancy said this. I want to continue the work that we have started. I think we are on a great trajectory. We've identified a lot of challenges that we have in our district, and we've also created some solutions to address those challenges. But the momentum is going, and I want to be part of the team, continue to stay on the team to help see some of those ideas and practices mature. I started as a parent leader, so I was PTO president, vice president, served on DivCo, was one of the community members who created DivCo. I also was one of the folks who worked with the community to develop the equity policy. So in terms of community grassroots involvement, I have laid that foundation, and it led me to running for the board. At the board table, and this is not something that you see very often, I'm one of 7. And there have been a few times where my voice was an outlier, and it was quite humbling. But I am a courageous leader. Even though I'm one of 7 and you might outvote me, I am definitely not going to quiet my voice. I have something to say. I think it's relevant, and I will kindly ask you to listen. And eventually, with collaboration and with communication and working together in a team environment, some of those things actually came back up again, and we were able to address them. And I did not say I told you so, even though I wanted to. So there are times when being on the board is really, really hard and it's emotional, and there are times when it's joyful. I want to serve again. This is a hard job, but it's an important job. I don't have any kids in D97 anymore, so I'm serving as a parent and community leader. I also don't have any expertise in education, but I have a sales background, so I'm analytical. I can identify the needs and I can identify the gaps, and those are the things that I talk about and address. And sometimes I don't have teacher speak. I'm not going to have teacher speak, but I can talk as a community member and bring that perspective as well as a parent. That's what's important. If we need buy-in and we're communicating something that's happening at the district or at the board table, I'm a person who's thinking about the language that's going to be appropriate for everyone so that we can win. Sometimes it's about how things are communicated. I think Becky mentioned that earlier, and I'm thinking about that. Here's the gap. Here's how that word is not really something that the community uses. Let's change it. Let's make sure that we're communicating this idea or this thing so that is most receptive to the community. And I think those are the things that I bring to the table, and I'm asking for your vote.
All right. Thank you. Becky?
I love every single person that has been able to speak before me. I mean, it's hard to sometimes sell yourself when you really believe in the things that these individuals are saying. But if I was to say, how do I stand out? How do I, what do I bring to the table? I can tell you that I have worked from urban districts to suburban districts that are very affluent, that look like our community. I've been in Highland Park, Glen Ellen, to Amnesty Wayne Township in Indianapolis that looks very much like our CPS schools. And as I mentioned, I've traveled the state of Indiana, working for Fort Wayne, Evansville, if you know anything about the geography there, East Chicago. So I got a chance to really work with teachers and people. And I think at the end of the day, I believe in public education. I believe in civic service. I want to be a part of this amazing board that is already making a lot of great progress towards equity. But I also think I want to be that member that kind of brings things together. So my school psychology background, I've had tough conversations, delivered really tough news to parents on multiple levels, or had to have like a really hard conversation with teachers. I'm not afraid to challenge people to think in different ways. I'm a critical thinker. I believe our kids should be challenged to think in that way and to think about things broadly, but also face conflict with optimism. It's not bad to disagree on things. It's actually a wonderful tool for the rest of their lives. So I do feel that my profession has trained me as a mental health provider, but also as a person that is ready to kind of ask tough questions and be able to navigate kind of conceptualizing what everyone is saying. I believe every student has a story, every family has a story, and my goal is to kind of bring those gaps together and bring it back into the community. How do we go from like talking policy and theory and curriculum and then make it relevant to our community?
Okay, thank you much. And folks, with that concludes our candidate forum today. On behalf of Dan and Max and Jill and the team at GCM and Wednesday Journal, I want to thank our panelists. Can we give our candidates a round of applause, please? We also want to thank you for being here. We know it's a very long day, and so coming here and being a part of this process shows how important it is for you as well to be a part of this, so thank you as well. Thank you for those streaming at home, and again, a recording of this will be available tomorrow. and election coverage, candidate election guide rather, digital version Monday, print version no later than Wednesday. And we also want to thank the folks at the Oak Park Public Library for letting us use this amazing space. And so with that, thank you. Have a good night. Be well, be warm. Thank you.